Hello, I'm Brandon, and I am excited to welcome you to the Tansson Talk Show, where our mission here every week is to bring people together. I'm always excited to do this show, and kicking off our summer season of the show, I'm so excited to have here today Zachary Vaillancourt. Welcome to the show, and I'm so excited to have you back on.
Hi, Brandon. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you. So, first of all, how are you doing today, Zachary?
I'm doing all right. I just recently got off of college for the summer vacation, so I'm excited about that. And I'm starting my summer internship tomorrow, so definitely got a lot on my mind between just finishing the college semester and getting ready for my internship.
Well, I'm just so excited, like I said, for you to begin your internship. And how does it feel finally being done with the spring 2024 semester?
It's been super satisfying. I'm a junior aerospace right now at this point, so it's been definitely one of the toughest semesters that I've had so far in college. So finally getting off of it after the grueling class I've had to take. It's super relieving and satisfying, to be honest.
I can only imagine. And yeah, and I know this is your second time on my current Tansson Talk show and your fourth time overall, speaking with us. And so, first of all, Lisa, I'm just so glad to have you back on, and I'm just so excited for us to get into our conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of crazy to think we've done this 3 4 times before. So it's always nice to kind of touch up and see what we talk about every time.
Yeah, and before I have you reintroduce yourself, so I did have a little bit of a surprise. So I actually went
Really?
ahead and earlier today I re-listened to all three of our previous conversations. And so I'm actually going to go ahead and yeah, sum up a little bit as to what we've spoken about in those conversations, and then I'll lead you right into, like I said, allowing for you to go ahead and reintroduce yourself. So
All right.
our first conversation was March 31st of 2022. It was your second semester of freshman year, and you were so excited to finally be out of the pandemic restrictions, and you were anticipating on declaring an aerospace engineering major, following your love for stargazing, and then just a couple months later, you were weeks following your freshman year. You are continuing with your love for stargazing. You have officially declared your major in aerospace, and you are excited to become a peer mentor in your living learning community. And you were very glad to have over a 3.0 GPA, the department average, heading into summer break. And then in our most recent discussion, you were an aerospace rising junior with a new minor in astronomy, with 2 internships, an intense summer course, while also leading the astronomy club. And so now, if you can do the honors of reintroducing yourself.
Sure. Yeah. Again, I obviously I know myself, but it's always kind of crazy hearing myself in retrospect. But yeah. So, my name is Zachary Vaillancourt. As of right now, I'm going to be a rising senior in the aerospace engineering major. Right now, I'm still doing my minor in astronomy, but I've also taken a minor in physics at the moment, and may or may not look into some others. And right now, I'm not. I am going to be in an department next year inside my LLC, and right now I'm not in the leadership role of the astronomy club. So at this point in my time in college, I'm looking forward to the future and looking forward to the uh, prospects I have ahead. So yeah, I guess that's the gist of where I am at this point to reintroduce myself.
Well, first of all, I said thank you so much for that, and and congratulations on your new additional minor of physics.
Yeah, thank you. I know it was kind of funny to add on another one, but after I talked with my counselor, I realized that it was only one extra class actually compared to the curriculum that aerospace majors have to take anyways. So when I saw that and realized it was just one extra class, I thought, oh, there's really no reason I don't need to go for it because I'm actually kind of sparse on classes, so I figured it'd be worthwhile.
Wow, and you mentioned a little bit too that that you're interested in continuing to explore. So you want to add another one, or are you just exploring just in general for classes to take?
Um, I'm not quite sure yet, to be truthful, but I am just looking for more classes to take because my schedule, I've been ahead of the curriculum for the most part. So like going into college, I had some advanced placement AP tests I took that got me out of English and a couple of the I guess, gen ed requirements. Virginia Tech calls them pathways, but there's a bunch of equivalents elsewhere that you just have to take to be well rounded. So I got out of most of those, meaning I didn't need to take as many electives in the future. So because I had all that going into college, I have a lot more space in order to kind of freely pick classes. So that's where I'm at. And I've, like, for example, this coming semester, I took that one physics class that I need to take for the physics minor. And I'm also doing an aerospace elective that it's pretty interesting. So I have the fact that I have the flexibility to pick that on top of my um, like required classes. I think that's a really neat freedom to have.
Well, I'm so glad though that you were able to get ahead of the curve, early back in high school to help prepare you to where you are now. And so, I did want to start by asking, so how has this past year been for you? Your junior year of of undergrad.
Ooh, it's it's been a tough one because I mentioned earlier how it's the toughest for the major, and for me, yeah, it absolutely has been grueling. Like right now, my GPA is taking a bit of a hit for it, so I'm technically just a little under a 3 right now, I think. So that's been kind of tough to deal with. And right now, like grade wise for my classes, the aerospace classes have been honestly kind of whooping me. But everything that isn't aerospace class wise has been pretty easy. So honestly, it's been really tough. So I definitely have a lot to talk about that aspect of like how it's changed because again, for aerospace majors, junior year is the toughest. So grade wise, it's been tough. But I guess like life experience wise, there's been a lot to digest. I've had some good and bad friend experiences. I've had a lot of stuff happen with the astronomy club. And I mentioned briefly how I'm not in my LLC this coming year. I chose an apartment instead. There's definitely a lot I've had to think about that. So a lot's happened, not related to academics, and academically it's been tough, but it's definitely been dynamic. I definitely appreciate that because heading on into the future, it's always good to make sure you're never really, I guess, stagnating going forward.
Yeah, I completely understand that. And so, actually, if you're able to take us to like the very beginning of, this year, actually even a little bit beforehand. So I know we last spoke at the end of July 2023, and so how actually was your that summer? Because I know it was a very busy summer for you, and I know I spoke to you at like sort of like the tail end of it, but hopefully you were able to have some sort of relaxation since you were working two different internships and you know and of course a summer course during a single summer, which is intense of itself, but then go
Yeah.
from that into as you said, the most intense academic year.
Yeah. So I guess a summary of that overall, the two internships I had, one was with the Space Grant Consortium. I've mentioned it a couple times, I know, but the gist of it is that you have a summer academy with a bunch of high school students for approximately a week where we go on site to a NASA facility, staying at a local community college. And during that time, we get to talk with some NASA subject matter experts while the high school students prepare a final presentation based on the information they've synthesized from the online portion of the respective space grant course and what they've learned that week. So the structure of it is kind of like a summer camp, but because of summer academy, they're having deliverables and assignments too. So for us interns, it's structured like a summer camp, and it can range anywhere from 1 to 3 weeks. So last summer, I was lucky and I got assigned 3 weeks, which I was happy about. And then simultaneously, I had my internship at the Newport News shipyard. It's close by to where I live. I think it's the largest industrial employer in Virginia, actually, and it's a super respectable. My dad works there, so it was really cool getting that offer as well. So that internship lasted 10 weeks. So, like you said, combined with space grant and the shipyard internship, that was 13 weeks of the summer overall. That was tough. And then additionally, I withdrew from dynamics in that spring semester because I was getting kind of whipped. The homework pacing was super fast. Dynamics is a really tough class. It's pretty much a weed out class because you need to be good at dynamics for all the engineering majors that required it. So because of that, I decided to take the summer class version of it. So after I would get home from my 9 to 5 Newport News shipyard internship, I would just kind of study dynamics. And then on those weeks where I had the Space Grant Consortium, it was good to be in a place that I've been before because I've been a student in it and I have a lot of exposure to it. Whereas the shipyard, I was learning my way about the inner workings for the first time. But at the same time, the Space Grant, it's a more rigorous internship scheduling wise, at least, because whereas the shipyard is, like 9 to 5, Space Grant, it goes pretty much from like 7 in the morning to 10 in the evening. You would definitely know it's you pretty much have your day arranged in time slots for the entire time. So that's why I say it's more rigorous scheduling wise. So even though it was familiar and it was more entertaining to me because I've been exposed to it before, it was just as rigorous. So with all those factors considered, that's why that summer was as busy as it was. But to answer your question, I did get a little bit of relaxation. It was nice. It was definitely nice going towards later half this summer because the way the most online classes work over the summer, they go for pass fail, and if you pass, which is a 70 or above, that will get you the credit you need to transfer it to your college. So obviously I didn't slack off, but it was kind of nice knowing that as I got closer to the end, I'd look at the grades and realize I had a bunch of insurance so that the final that I'd take wouldn't be as scary as it was because I knew I had a good grade going forward. So even though it was still tough from start to finish, I think that helped me relax a little more. I took a little more time to just hang out with everyone when I could and just network with my friends. Because normally I hang out with my friends over the summer at least a couple times just to touch base with them. But that was tough because of my schedule at first. So on the later half, I would just network with some local friends, find a time and place to hang out while I knew my class was getting close to a close. So yeah, it's a pretty good summary of that summer specifically because, yeah, it was tough at the beginning, still tough towards the end, but I managed to arrange it in a way that I could just reach out to my friends and have a bit of a good time before I went back to school.
Well, that's good at least that you were able to have, some time to be with your friends to get reacquainted, even if just briefly. But yeah, I don't know how you managed to do all that this summer and speak to us on the podcast in the midst of your double
Yeah.
internship. I don't know how you did that, or or how you managed to even squeeze it in. But it was nevertheless great
Yeah.
speaking with you, though.
Yeah. I remember it was at midnight, so I was very happy we could make it work. And that was definitely, I would imagine that's one of the more unique podcasts. So I'm also very happy we were able to make it work.
Yeah, I'm glad that it was able to work out as well. But but heading into that, to that fall 2023 semester. So I know you said that it was definitely a difficult year all around, but but did it start off that way, or did it sort of ease into it? Or how was that experience for you during that fall semester?
During that fall, that's a tough one. So I mentioned it was a tough transition going from the internship to that semester. It wasn't tough because of the necessarily logistics, but because of how it was scheduled, the last day I was working at the shipyard was on a Friday. And then I moved into college over the weekend and was back in my dorm by Monday. So when I say it was a tough transition, it was half of it was just rushing to make that timeline meet because of that 13-week instead of just 10 weeks for the internship. So that was one aspect. The other aspect was that even though there were a lot of tough classes in the previous spring semester, the fall semester, the vast majority of it was actually just aerospace classes. So that was absolutely tough for me to just adapt to on the fly. So logistically, it was interesting because there was a lot of overlap in the classes, but at the same time, we were all unique enough that they just definitely were tough to handle with on their own simultaneously. So scheduling wise was a lot of time studying with not a lot of time to just relax and do other things otherwise. So that was one aspect of it. The other aspect that I was struggling with, my friend group was, I have a friend group right now who was pretty studious, and we were at different points in our education. So like some of them, I withdrew from dynamics and got ahead. Some of my friends, they withdrew from statics. That was their weed out class. So they were like slightly shifted semester wise. So they were taking a class I already took. And like some of us, it was vice versa. So that's one thing that our friend group is dealing with. So we would like spend some time helping each other with one subject and others on another. So even though that was great, it was tough at times because I was willing to try to do my best to help them out. But at the same time, I was still focusing on my stuff. So I guess overall, that was one aspect that, although it wasn't significant, it just affected how I kind of spent my time. And I guess friend wise in general, it was also tough trying to make time to talk with some of my friends while also going through the school year, which helped because like some of my friends in major, I'd make time every now and then to talk to them, just hang out for a bit. Nothing much, but just enough that we could touch base. But at the same time, it would be all too frequent that we'd all have a mutual assignment. So we'd each say like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I can't make it," and I'd be like, "Yeah, I get it. I'm doing it too." So the fact that it happened like multiple times throughout the semester, that made it kind of tough. And even though I've always been passionate about aerospace, it's kind of tough sometimes when if you're not careful with how you pace yourself interacting with people. Because if you're just studying all day and you're not careful, you might feel more lonely than you actually are. So that was something that I realized could be a problem if I didn't manage it carefully. So I guess kind of interacting with my friends and also managing all the time for my studies. That was one aspect that made it more difficult than previous semesters, I'd say.
Well, that certainly, makes sense. And I'm glad at least that you at least attempted to try to make time, even if it didn't entirely work out. Yeah, I mean, in all instances, but I would say even for myself, like it's definitely hard when, everyone's on very different schedules, and I can't even imagine like, for you all who probably had like close to similar classes, yeah, at the time, then having to shift and be at different paces because it's like you can't really, relate as much to it and speak as much to the classes, I would presume.
Yeah, it was interesting having that communication between classes because of the time I was ahead of the curve, so I could help them with some. But at the same time, between classes, it can change pretty significantly depending on the instructor. So it's pretty interesting hearing the similarities and differences between like, oh, you're having this person for this class. Oh, they've taught it differently than my instructor. That's pretty neat. So there was definitely a little bit of that, just trying to figure it out. While also dealing with the subject matter that again also might have been different depending on what the instructor focused on.
Yeah, that certainly makes sense. And I guess for you, like outside of just your academic studies, yeah, like I guess how were your like your extracurriculars like during that time, and how did you try to make time to like hopefully make some time for yourself or relax a little bit? Because I know that that just sounds like a stressful semester.
Yeah, it was definitely tougher than usual. I tried to make a point to be involved in not less extracurriculars, but just try to tone it down a bit because freshman year I was in two design teams, which is a lot for anybody. But once I got to sophomore year, I immediately decided to leave one of them because I knew I wouldn't be able to handle it. So likewise, I kind of shifted my role going into junior year. So I was again, I mentioned last time I was the president of the astronomy club at the time. But since then, one thing that occurred to me based on both my schedule and some of the friendship dynamics some of the new and upcoming officers had, I realized that it might be in a better interest overall to, I guess, just step down for now and let them see what they could do. Because even though I was a junior, I knew that for any organization, you have to have a little bit of younger members on at all times because then you can have some new ideas to kind of work with, see what sticks, what doesn't. So I kind of decided to step down as president just because I knew my load was heavy. I knew their friend group had a lot of things that they could work with as officers. So I decided to step down and just attend casually in the fall. And then I didn't end up making too many at all in the spring semester because it was tougher still. So even though I obviously am passionate about astronomy, I realized it'd be in my best interest to try to tone that down because the living learn community, I adjusted my role a bit. It wasn't easier. Nothing changed like role wise as opposed to the astronomy club, but the role I was in was a little slightly less effort than the previous year, in my opinion. So I thought, even though that's nice, I couldn't really change as much as the astronomy club. So I decided to cut back on that to, I guess, just manipulate my time management.
Well, I'm glad at least that you were able to, I mean, to tone things down a little bit to hopefully get some more time to yourself and to focus on your studies. And And I guess for you, during that fall semester, I guess did, in comparison to previous, semesters, which I know were also difficult, but not as difficult as the most recent fall one. I guess did it take a moment to try to adjust to all of it, or did you try to, you know, or did you go in thinking it was going to be, I guess, the same or similar, or I guess how was the thought process and workflow for you during that time?
Yeah, that's a good question. I definitely would be tougher. That's one thing that I made sure to cement uh, as a certainty for me. So I definitely need to be busier. And then I kind of thought to myself what the classes were. So I kind of heard a couple opinions from some upperclassmen, just general vibes on what classes were the easiest and the hardest. And I took some time to look into the Canvas courses before the semester starts because they always post it, usually a little, ideally a week before, but usually only a couple days before. But I put a ton of time to put like office hours and tentative exam dates on my calendar. I just glanced over the notes that were already there, just enough to feel out like which courses would be the toughest versus others. So that was how I started my mindset. And then as the course went on, I tried to make I tried to make sure I could actively adjust my schedule to see what I was studying because there were some classes that I knew like assignments were due sooner than others, but I've got to focus on all of them at some point. There were some classes that are fairly easy compared to the others, and then there were some that were like the absolute weed out classes that it's really difficult, if possible at all, to do well in. So that was, I guess, it was just making sure I was actively aware what was going on at all times. That even if it was tough, even if it was, it felt impossible. Just keeping a semi-level head and making sure I could be present instead of being worried about future stuff. I think that helped my mindset a lot getting through that semester.
Well, I'm certainly glad at least that, I mean, that you were able to successfully, go through the semester and yeah, so I'm sure that you were a bit relieved to sort of be done with that semester and head into your winter break at the time.
Yeah, it absolutely was nice because again, it's a breath of fresh air. You could take winter classes, but another thing that came up mainly after that semester, but is also true in general at this point, is that even though I could take retook dynamics over the summer, at this point my classes are so esoteric that there's not really much room for failure at this point because there's not really an online version of aerospace specific class you could take because no one's going to want to teach them. So instead of like thinking about what could exist, it was really a relief thinking that, oh, I don't have to worry about planning a break class. So yeah, it was absolutely super relieving going into that winter break.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend, based off the stress that you're describing, I wouldn't recommend a an accelerated winter class during that time. That's just
Yeah.
me.
No, yeah, yeah, that's fair. I know some people do it for like some of the more basic entry courses to your major because if I remember correctly, I think there were dynamics and deform sections applicable, which does help a lot of engineering majors. So in theory, I could have taken dynamics preemptively instead of at the normal spring schedule time and then summer afterwards. But yeah, that would have been very stressful between having less than a month to learn it. And I want to say the classes are like 3 to 5 hours a day because you have less time. So yeah, I just made an effort to acknowledge that they exist and consider them. But again, you're right. Knowing that I no longer had to possibly worry about those, or again, knowing that I mainly just could focus on the classes at hand, that helped a lot.
That's good, at least. And I know in our previous discussions, I know you mentioned that you always like using, the breaks to, reset, refocus, and, relax a bit. And so hopefully that still holds true now.
Yeah, it was between having nothing during winter break and more lenient summer this time. It's definitely helping to readjust my mindset because if I'm not careful, it sometimes it was a slog during this past year. Because yeah, winter break, I made an effort to just relax, hang out with friends, just have a happy holiday season and all that. That was very relaxing. And this summer, as opposed to the other summer, I only have a one internship with the shipyard instead of a space grant. So having 10 weeks instead of 13 and no summer class will definitely help me prepare for the senior year ahead.
I'm glad at least that that you're going to have a more relaxing summer this time. And before I ask you about your most recent spring 2024 semester, um, when I was re-listening to our previous episodes, there was one thing that you actually mentioned in our discussion last summer that I did actually want to ask you about. So
Okay.
during that discussion, you had actually said um, that even though your sophomore year was difficult compared to your freshman year, you believe that if it is difficult, then that means you're doing it right. And so, do you still believe in that right now, having gone through your junior semester?
Yeah, definitely. Because again, this stuff is it's intended to be more challenging. It's like sophomore year, but amped up still because even though the sophomore year provides the fundamentals for it, I think junior year is where you really get to test to see if you stand up to it, which is interesting because for some people, it feels like they can just kind of whiz through classes. It's true for any major, for any branch of college, but again, you just have those people who make it feel effortless. And there's some who just have to naturally study and work harder for it. So that's kind of how I felt with this past year, just getting through all of it. So even though it was tough for me, and I mentioned my GPA took a hit, whereas if I'm not careful, it would be demoralizing to see everyone else or a bunch of people excelling. I think it absolutely just shows that you can still have what it takes because even though, again, I sometimes it's tough to feel that way compared to everyone else. It's funny whenever I mention in passing in a conversation that I'm an aerospace engineering major, everyone's immediately kind of like, "Wow, that's super cool." As people assume, and obviously you kind of need to be smart to be trusted with the stuff entailed to aerospace majors like rockets and planes. You can't really mess that up. There's not much room for error. So it's kind of cool to hear that when people mention it. Not so much because of like, it's like, oh, I'm an aerospace engineering, I'm the best, but just because it's good to know that the work you're doing is valuable and people recognize that it's difficult and takes a lot of effort. So even if it is tough, I think just kind of knowing what it accomplishes in the long run and knowing that you're still trying your best making an honest effort. I think that is definitely still true with this echelon of classes.
Well, yeah, I'm glad that Liz said that you're continuing with your work ethic, and I entirely agree, with what you were saying, and that, sometimes some things might take more, effort and studying than others, and so I know for me in this spring semester, yeah, I've always really loved everything, of course, in my graduate program, but the spring semester, the class that I took definitely required so much more effort than like probably probably my whole 2 degrees combined. Um, and and as funny as that sounds, it's like I don't know. There's certain subjects that not to say that they're easy, but more so that like I'm constantly working on it, and yeah, and so when it comes to just doing the assignment, I'm able to just apply my knowledge because I'm always studying and doing the work, asking questions. But I know this most recent semester, it's like wow, it's like even with all of that, it's still requires so much energy and effort, and it's really hard to sort of even describe that amount of work to someone else because it's just
Right.
like it just requires so much more power, even if it's something super easy, just because of just how focused you are on the subject.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting when you put it like that because there was there was one conversation I had which I think really touches well on this subject. It was with the barber I had when I came back home to get a haircut after break. So we were just talking. I like some people just kind of get their haircut in silence. I usually try to strike at least a little conversation, both because it's not awkward and because it's good to just get some practice socializing too outside of just your bubble of friends that you're comfortable with. But when I was talking, the person I mentioned with, she was going to ODU actually. She was getting a bachelor's in psychology. So whether or not psychology is easier or harder than aerospace is up to you. But the thing I always think about for different majors is that it's just distinctly different. You could say it's easier or harder, but it's easier or harder in different aspects. Like as you would imagine, aerospace engineering focuses on a ton of math. So for some who genuinely struggle with math and struggle with just like basic calculus, it's kind of unfathomable the amount of math wizardry we have to do in aerospace. But likewise for psychology, it's a whole I imagine it's a whole lot of intuition and a different branch of subject matter altogether. Because when I talked with her, she mentioned she'd learned a lot of neuroscience as one of the aspects they have to study for psychology. I could have done better in chemistry, but I still did pretty well. But because it was tough for me, I kind of appreciated it better and understanding just getting a sense of what implications you could make out of chemical interactions, for example. So when I recognized the effort that my barber put into neuroscience just by hearing her talk about it, that's something that always solidifies me and just helped me keeps that mindset of like, don't think you're better than everyone, even if you're smart. So hearing that was definitely a really interesting perspective to hear, to, like you said, just to acknowledge about how everyone has their own level of difficulty in their major and just, I guess, the different aspects of education in general.
Yeah, and I entirely, agree with that as well. And even for me in the communication field, there's just so many different aspects of it, and it's so interesting because, like, for my master's program that I just finished from, as of recording this a few weeks ago, is that we have so many different sectors that you can go into, and different concentrations. So you can go anything from strategic communication to media studies to uh, lifespan communication. And so I would like to say that I think I was definitely, I tried my best to be like well rounded in everything and whatnot. But it's so interesting, to see where like me and my fellow classmates, like our interests are. And so like our core classes, for instance, like we might have two in media studies and two in uh, more interpersonal, relational communication. But yeah, it's like everyone doesn't have the same strong suits. And so like for me, while I liked both of those, I'm very much a media studies person, and not as much for applied uh, applied relational communication when it comes to mixed methods, because math is not my strong suit. And so that is very, not necessarily statistics heavy, but you need to at least understand the background of it.
Right.
And that's not really where my skill set was. And so I feel like I need a bit more time. And so yeah, so I completely understand what you were saying in regards to that.
Yeah. It's always good to just have that mindset too, even if it is tough to fathom that. It's important knowing that even though you understand there is a shift, you don't have to necessarily understand the extent of the shift. Just kind of ballpark and just be open enough to be, I guess, empathetic to other people's experiences too. Because it's interesting. I definitely plan on reviewing some of my old notes and other aspects of my education, like once I get older and actually get a job, because even though I've learned a bunch of stuff in college, the tough part for me at least is that you realistically are learning all these courses in 3 months. So obviously you learn it as best you can, but to me conceptually, it's kind of interesting knowing that people spend multiple decades or at least multiple years researching some niche parts of their industry, whether it's aerospace or beyond. I feel like it was, I don't know if it's just me, but I feel it was more obvious for aerospace because there's so many niche applications. Like, for example, my aerodynamics professor, he is the director of the wind tunnel we have at Tech, which obviously that lets you in on a lot of niche applications. I'm pretty sure his focus was in like, I think it was subsonic airflow. That was just seeing how um, the aerodynamics of wings and stuff work at subsonic Mach numbers. I'm pretty sure that was it. But just realizing that there was that level of speciality in an aerodynamics class, which again should generally cover all sorts of aerodynamic cases, was just astonishing to me. So just keeping in mind just how nuanced it can be for so many different aspects is always crazy. And I think it definitely helps my mindset when thinking about education and other people's experiences holistically.
Yeah, that is so true. And yeah, I mean, I feel like there's just so many different, aspects of study for, just like you said, just so many different areas that, you know, I don't know. I could be here for hours speaking about, like, it's like I wonder who the
Yeah.
person is that did this or decided this, and so much stuff that we just take for granted. I mean, some stuff that might just be as simple as the TV remote. Someone had to, had to analyze it and study the technology, to be able to make that happen, and and making sure that the infrared could work and register with the TV. I mean, there's just so much that I could go on forever, but heading into your spring 2024 semester, would you say that this was a different type of semester for you, or about the same level of difficulty as the fall?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I would say, I mean, at least in my case, it was less difficult course wise, but it was definitely a different kind of difficulty because at that point, I think one of the most notable classes in the fall, to backtrack a bit, was fluid dynamics, because that's one of those classes, at least for me, that I heard before taking it that was the weed out course, and it was, because again, it's just absurdly difficult conceptually because at least for that specific class of Virginia Tech, it's for both aerospace and ocean engineering because uh, in that level of engineering, air and water is just a fluid, to the point where I like to think that aerospace and ocean engineers kind of do the same thing. You're just dealing with different properties of a different fluid. So that kind of covered both aspects. But I mentioned how specialized aerospace and any other major could be, for example. That was kind of the class that made me click and realize, wow, this is absurd. How he went from like basics to basics in aerospace, and now this stuff in fluids. So that was fall. But going to the spring, it went from the kind of generic stuff, but still an advanced aerospace level, to getting into the more esoteric level of generic stuff, because we covered the basics of aerodynamics, but that class is titled Aerodynamics and Compressibility. So one subject we covered on extensively is shock waves and how they interact at different air speeds, whether it was subsonic or supersonic or etc. So going into that unit and a bunch of other aspects of different classes, I was like, wow, this is so specialized, even more than before. So I guess with that in mind, it was still difficult, even if it was slightly easier compared to the fall. But it was a different kind of difficult in that it was so much more specialized. So on the one hand, it would be like, it'd be easier in the sense that there was less to work from content wise, but it was just so difficult to understand where it was coming from in the first place. So that's why the textbooks were essential. Like, online sources will not help you as much because it is specialized. Like, sometimes I'd Google stuff just to understand it conceptually, and it would help every now and then, just because I always Google stuff to appreciate context compared to just the textbooks. It helps me a bit understand it better. But it was tougher for these classes because I'm like, yeah, there's not a lot to understand. So I guess it really is just the textbook and the course slides to go off of. So it's just a different kind of tough, I guess, compared to the fall semester, in that it was super duper specialized.
Well, I mean, that certainly definitely sounds like a lot of mental energy. And how would you say that you worked to ensure that you were taking care of, personally during that time?
That was a tough one. I took a different approach for the spring semester compared to the fall because my friend group was taking significantly different classes after that fall semester. So I thought it'd be a good idea, maybe not a good idea, but an interesting idea to kind of go my own way for a bit to see how I'd handle myself. Because the good part about being friends is that you can kind of work a lot together to get stuff done. But I guess the downside of that, the trade off, is that you usually work with people together to get things done. So then it's tougher by yourself to get things done if you're not careful with how you pace it. So I realized I was kind of on the other end where I was kind of, it wasn't relying on, but I usually like to work with friends more so than myself, to the point where, excuse me, sometimes it would affect my performance individually. So I thought to myself, I better adjust my way of studying so that I can also study by myself. So for the spring semester, I definitely spent a lot of time studying by myself. So that was one aspect that I wanted to change just because I thought it'd be different and it would kind of help me adjust my study habits. But that was just an aspect of how I approached that semester. As for taking care of myself, it was a little tougher because I didn't have as many friends to go off of. So mainly I would just take time pacing myself, taking breaks when needed. trying to use my judgment to the best of my ability to determine when I should take those breaks. Like, is it like, am I tired because I'm worried about doing it, or am I tired because I actually need to take a break? So that was what I kind of did to pace myself. I mentioned how I didn't go to the astronomy club meetings as much, and I didn't. So that was tough for me too, just making time to see what I would need to relax. But overall, I think it was just tougher to time balance overall, and just making that executive call that made it tougher, and I guess just refined how I would go about taking breaks.
That makes sense. And would you say that as of right now in the present day that you've been able to at least like reach back out to some of the the friends that you haven't been able to speak with in a while?
I plan to, but it's been surprisingly busy. It's not hard, but I was doing a lot of errands and stuff when I got back home during the 3 days I had, because again, since I'm getting an apartment next semester, which is cool in its own discussion, there's there's a lot of paperwork and logistics I got to figure out. I got the lease signed and everything before I got back from the spring semester, but I got an email about stuff they'd like me to do before I officially swap roommates in July. Because my roommate, for context, my roommate has a friend of his that is graduating this semester. So the apartment complex had some stuff that I needed to do in order to kind of seal the deal with the roommate switch. So because of that, I had to go out of my way to do a bunch of various paperwork. And then there was the shipyard, which also had some kind of last minute paperwork I had to seal down. And then there was a couple other like miscellaneous errands, like the haircut I mentioned I wanted to get because I didn't really get one during college. I went to go dry clean my suit because I used it for a research meeting for my undergraduate team. And then, yeah, just a bunch of other small stuff that kind of piled up quickly. So I was like, wow, I got a lot to settle, even if it is relaxing being back. So eventually, I plan on reaching out to my friends once I have everything kind of steady. It was just turbulent at first, adjusting to getting back and doing some paperwork for stuff. But I definitely plan on reaching out to them. It's like my mini resolution for this summer, now that I don't have a second internship in summer class.
Yeah, and there are and there's definitely two things I definitely want to ask too. So the first question I guess is um, for you, how did you know that this was the time for you to get your apartment and to move out of your living learning community?
Okay, that was a good one, because the thing that I noticed is about how much college forces you to grow up, because there's the class content which prepares you for your job, but at the same time, at least as a freshman, you're getting ready to live by yourself. Like for me, it's kind of a scary concept, and I guess for anyone in general, it's just kind of crazy thinking about how your parents won't be there for you anymore since you're used to growing up with them in your house forever. So that aspect definitely forces you to be independent, being in the dorm with, even if it is a preferred roommate versus a random, you still have to care for your own side of the room well. So that's an aspect of independence that's kind of a staple for a lot of people. Like everyone reminisces, or probably at least recognizes their first day in the dorm when they were, like how they were feeling at that instance. It's a common occurrence to see, and in hindsight, chuckle at a freshman realizing and learning how to do laundry for the first time, stuff like that. So that experience of a freshman getting a dorm room for the first time is definitely an important milestone of college. So that's the freshman experience. Most sophomores will usually go off campus immediately, because sometimes they want to stay on campus because they kind of are forced to by university policy, or just because their family wants them to meet some people immediately through a common interest, whether it's a dorm hall to get easy access to classes, or an LLC, which kind of forces you to live on campus in that dorm. So that's the freshman experience, and kind of how the sophomore experience usually goes. So for me, by contrast, in my sophomore year and junior year, I stayed in the same dorm. And because I had a preference, I stayed on the same floor. My rooms were usually close to each other. So for me, it was a pretty static experience in terms of my living situation. So although that was nice to have some stability, one thing that kind of clicked to me is that I still had to learn to be independent at some point. Not that I wasn't already, but an apartment, living by yourself, versus being in a dorm by yourself is a pretty different experience. So that's something kind of recognized compared to my peers who were in their own apartment. I thought to myself, wow, that's kind of interesting, because after talking with everybody and hearing the general consensus, it really is unusual for a sophomore and a junior, especially being in a dorm room still. So that's something I kept in mind. So the one of the incentives that made me decide to get an apartment was me deciding not to be in the LLC anymore. And the reason I didn't decide to be in the LLC anymore is because I think I kind of outgrew it, because it is oriented towards freshman engineers and it is nice helping them. But at that echelon, even though I would be a fountain of wealth for them, it was pretty, to me, it was very different seeing like the consistent freshman shenanigans versus what I was doing as a junior, to the point where it was harder for me to relate because I was so focused on what I was doing. So I guess that kind of made it hard for me to relate as well, because even though I knew it, I wasn't as fresh. So sometimes I would think it's more of like a parent kid dynamic than a peer to peer thing. So that's one thing that, at least for me, I felt like occurred. So that was one aspect. The other aspect was kind of the independence I was talking about, that I kind of need to develop my own independent skills. And for me, I felt like being in a dorm hindered that. One, because I was used to it. And two, there were a couple other aspects that might be good to know in real life, because, yeah, I just thought it would be better to learn. Like, for example, the benefit of being in a dorm on campus is that you're on campus. And because you're on campus, the academic buildings where you have classes in are so much closer. Like, for me, I think the farthest class I've ever had was like 20 minutes. And that's just from the dorm to that classroom. It's usually less than that. Like, I think the fastest, by contrast, was 6 minutes, where it was a building that was close to the residential side anyways. So since it was 8 a.m., I would get up like 7:40, get ready by 7:50, and then walk off at 7:50 to make it right before class started. So while that's a convenience factor for academic buildings, it kind of hurts you in the long run because it's so convenient. Same thing for the dining halls, where, again, it's really easy to wake up in 5-10 minutes and just go. But in the long run, I'm not going to have that luxury in everyday life. You got to go to a grocery store and cook yourself, unless you want to expensively live off of fast food forever. So that those two things occurred to me. And then I realized that my friend from high school needed an extra person in their apartment room. And that's kind of what those factors collectively made me decide to leave the LLC and be in the apartment complex as a whole. It was tough because I have a sneaking suspicion that the upper people of the LLC liked me because I stuck around so long. Because you get a lot of cycling out of people, so they were always looking for new people. So I think they might have been kind of sad that I left, and I felt bad too, because I do like the program as a whole. Obviously, it's an amazing way to orient freshman engineers. But at the same time, I figured I have to focus on me a bit too, for me to be more independent, because otherwise it would be harder for me to preach what I practice, because wouldn't be as independent. So I guess those factors combined maybe leave the LLC. Just the benefits, I would think, of me being independent and kind of bettering myself, so that I could hopefully be a better example for other students and other freshmen going forward. I think that was the collective consensus I came to with all those factors considered.
Yeah, I completely understand. Yeah, understand that. And of course, while I've never had an experience of, you know, of having a dorm life, anything as a distance learning student, I nevertheless, though, understand what you're meaning about, being able to, to move on and to make new experiences and not just stay stagnant with your current experiences, as much as you may have liked it. But I said that you've outgrown it for all intents and purposes.
Yeah, definitely. I just kind of thought it was my time, so I figured there's no time like the present, so I might as well just go to see what it was like.
Yeah, and continuing a bit forward too. So since you mentioned a little bit earlier about about new resolutions, like in terms of like you're saying reaching back out to your friends, and and of course with continuing to gain independence is, I know when we were just speaking last time, I know you said one of your goals for last summer going throughout the rest of 2023 was to what was it? Was to build up your LinkedIn and Instagram page. And so, how's that going?
The LinkedIn's I've been pretty happy with. I've done a bunch of other things since then that's helped. One thing that I am trying to balance with logistics wise is sometimes I've heard that in the context of LinkedIn, less is more. So even though I did grow it and update it with my experiences, I might go the other direction where I kind of refine what stays on and off of it. But I have made an effort to focus on it, refine it more. I also got an undergraduate research position, which I was pretty happy about. So I put down the LinkedIn and just a couple small things to update it with. So that I was happy about. The Instagram, though, that's again, that's one of those things that since I mainly use it for astronomy, it kind of fell to the wayside just because I wanted to prioritize everything else. So it's especially funny since I mentioned it was kind of resolution on the singular post from January of 2023, and it is now 2024, and I still have to. I have several posts that I have the pictures for, and I kind of know what I want to text, but I haven't put out there yet. So the LinkedIn I've been pretty satisfied with, and obviously I'll tinker with it once I start this internship. That's something I can put on there. And for the Instagram, yeah, that's something that I'll do my best to make some posts for because I like to make thorough posts. So yeah, LinkedIn was good. Instagram still a work in progress.
Well, hopefully, by this time next year that you've continued to made some more progress, and maybe two posts.
Yeah, yeah, I know. It's like that's the first step. It's true for most resolutions, and that's why, like comically on New Year's, like gym memberships increase at first, but then no one goes after like the first month. One of those things where the toughest part is to feel out your schedule and make time. So once I kind of get the gist of what I'll be working on in this internship, because as you can imagine, like week one in the first couple of days, it's just kind of feeling out logistics. So, first of all, this is just a statement for the shipyard in general. Because it's government contracting work, they obviously take security really seriously. And based on what it's like, I know I'm going to have to, get computer access to all of these things that I'll need to work. The awkward part about it, not because it's the shipyard's fault, but because of how government contracting works, they kind of wipe everything for you as an intern after you finish your previous internship, because again, you don't know if you're going to be back. I don't know if it's true for all internships or just because it's a government contracting one, but conceptually, it is kind of awkward just like reapplying for the stuff that I have already applied for in the past. Like, I don't think it will change significantly, but just kind of awkward knowing that I could have had it like saved over from last year. So that's something that I'm realizing I'll have to experience again this week, in addition to seeing the unique work that I'll be doing in my department. So once I feel out all of those things, that's when I'll kind of get a gauge for what I can do going forward. And yeah, like you said, hopefully get started on the Instagram. But I've almost started. It's just seeing how my schedule permits it.
Yeah, well, I'm definitely, like I said, very excited for you. And to comment a little bit about the New Year's resolution part, is that for me, I actually do August resolutions. So a lot
Really?
of times for me, I will come up with, I don't know, just like a vague topic for the year, at the very beginning of the year, and then I'll try to follow through with it. And but then by August, I would have actually refined it to what I actually want to do, and I use that for the rest of the year going into the next one. And so in that sense, it sort of makes it where my, I guess, supposed New Year's resolutions have a half a year to a year delay into what I do. But nevertheless, I think it kind of adds a little bit of fun to it. But I know since you're starting your internship, very soon, and I believe actually just a couple hours from the time we're speaking now is
Right. Yeah. It's tomorrow morning. Yeah.
yeah. And so overall, are you excited? Is there anything that you want to do differently that you can't share? Because I know you can't really
I know. Yeah. It's
speak about
like,
much, um, but for, I guess, for yourself, is there anything that you would do differently, like for time management or making time for yourself, that you want to do differently this time around, and even in preparing for your senior year of college?
that's a tough one because the thing about the shipyard is, and I think it's obviously it's kind of safe to say this because it's true for other internships. The way the shipyard has approached internships, from what I've seen, they always they make sure to never put you in the same department twice. For the shipyard specifically, there's so many different aspects you have to consider. depending on what internship you get. There's quality control, there's the actual engineering. For like the more hands-on stuff, there's the trade work. So in a basic sense, there's so many aspects you can take the shipyard, and it's always amazing to see, based on my last internship, how even if you're there for multiple decades, you're still not going to see everything at the shipyard. So that level of diversity is insane. The reason I bring it up is that because they make sure to put you in a different spot, it's going to be very different from my experience no matter what. I'm going from quality management to, submarine engineering. That's the gist of it. So it's kind of insane how different that juxtaposition is. So to answer your question, it's one of the best things I can do, I think, is just make sure that I'm more flexible than I already am. I mentioned how being adaptable to my schedule and making sure I kept a level head going in the present helped me out a lot in my spring semester. And I think that'll help me too in the summer, because even though I have a feel for how the shipyard works in a general sense based on my internship last year, it's going to be distinctly different just because I'm in a new department. It's a different year. Maybe they change some stuff that I don't know. So I think one of the best things I can do, and I guess better refine from spring to fall of next year, prepare to be more adaptable and be flexible, because I think that will also help my time management as well. The reason I segue to that is because something I've realized about time management for an internship, which is definitely different compared to school, is that school you're studying 24/7. You're literally eat, sleep, study, right? But for an internship, and it's just kind of silly to me because I'm used to school being like that and I haven't quite clicked for an internship, is that once you're off the clock, you technically don't really have to do anything. At least in our case, you usually couldn't bring a laptop home because there's proprietary information you don't want to have exposed. There's whole sessions on that. So for me, once I finish my shift, that's pretty much it. I've had that for my high school job that I got, and it's the same deal where you don't really worry about anything once you're off the clock. But because of how the shipyard is strict with it and your permissions, you pretty much can't. So that was something that I kind of had to think about how to approach, because that's actual internship at that point. I'm like, wow, even though I'd like to work on stuff beyond, I can't, because, that's it. Your time is up. So it definitely made me think, both in last summer and thinking about this coming summer now, that I have to really be prepared to optimize my time, because I didn't slack off, but it's like there's some stuff that for my internship I have to tinker with, because the whole point of internship is you learning, experimenting yourself using your knowledge you've got from school. So I had the freedom to tinker around with my project, which was awesome. But at the same time, I realized that if I wasn't careful and I didn't use my time correctly, I could let a small task drag on if I wasn't careful. So the two things I'm thinking about is being flexible with what I would be doing for the summer, making sure that I can keep that sense of adaptability, both going through the initial hurdle of getting all the paperwork and logistics figured out, and just thinking to myself, how can I optimize the time that I have now knowing what I'm doing? I think those two things will definitely help me optimize my experience going forward, both for this coming internship tomorrow and I guess next semester in the school year as a whole.
Well, overall, I just wish you, of course, the absolute best with your internship, and I'm just so excited for you to enter your senior year. Are you ready for it?
I think so, but there's only one way to find out. I'll just get through this summer, wait for the Canvas courses to post, and then I'll get to it.
Well, it will definitely come sooner than you think.
I know, yeah. I had this discussion with an alumni mentor of mine where, yeah, if this past semester was as fast as it feels like, if I'm not careful, the summer's going to feel like a time warp. I'm going to be like, wow, it's already like the day before. So that's something I'm keeping in mind too. I know it's going to go by fast, but I got to make the most of it too. So yeah, I'll just make the best of it, be in the present, and hope it doesn't go by too fast.
Yeah, well, definitely let's make the most of it, and and just continue doing what you're doing. And I know within our previous conversations, I know you had noticed that, to just it was important to make the most of the opportunities around you and make time for those around you as well. In that case, you specifically actually noted making time for your sister, and and just to keep going even when things seem difficult.
Yeah, that's definitely the gist of it. Just keep on keeping on. It's to put it in like the simplest expression possible.
But yeah, and so one thing, I did want to ask as we're, closing this out, is there anything else that you wanted to mention before we begin closing out this discussion?
I'm not quite sure. It's always interesting seeing how these podcasts go, and there's so many loose ends that can tie up later, but I'm not really sure in terms of like other than communication and stuff, which I know you'll cover here in a bit, like based on your conclusions you've done in the past. Yeah, you can edit that little.
Like I said, I always really enjoy, like I said, speaking with you and just the enlightening conversations that we have. And one thing I do want to actually mention, since this is a nice video podcast, before we begin closing out, is so I know that that you just have such a great passion for for science and stargazing and everything in between. And so, are you actually able to share with us a little bit about just all the the science stuff you have in your room behind you?
Oh yeah, that's there's definitely a lot to cover. I will say it in case you can tell the my wall covers like my poster covers most of my wall space, so there's more poster than wall. I'll admit my room is actually still a little cluttered because I mentioned I was still unpacking, and there's still a lot to unpack since my room's on the smaller side. Yeah, I can definitely cover some of the stuff like immediately here. So one thing that I'm definitely excited about the most is the F-35 poster from Pratt in the background. I mentioned in passing I was doing undergrad research. It's a program called English to Engineering, and basically it's Virginia Tech helping Pratt and Whitney look into some research initiatives with a focus on sustainability. So that's a whole other conversation that now, yeah, I could spend hours talking about. And one of the final products out of that experience was this really sick poster. So that's one poster. The one to the left of it, based on like perspective you see on screen, the 100th anniversary poster. That was one thing I was really excited about. We got it. I got it in high school because our band did a flight themed marching band show at the actual 100-year anniversary. So that was a poster I got after we went close to Langley to perform for them. So that was one thing. I'm trying to think. I think, yeah, the 50 years poster I got for some event or other on the 50th anniversary of the Apollo missions. I know this one here, it's tough to see. I got a VFW scholarship, the Veterans of Foreign Wars. That was one essay contest that came up a lot in middle school and high school. It's a funny story. My sister loved those scholarships. She did really well. She was super passionate. So she was like usually one of the contenders to win the scholarship. I didn't do it as often because I think I was focusing more on my studies at the time. It was tougher for me to manage my time. But there was one year where I made a solid effort and I actually did win. I think I was third place that year. I wasn't picky about the placement because I just enjoyed the experience at the time. That was a really satisfying picture frame to get. And I think that's the gist of it. The only thing I can think of, there's the shark one in the background. I loved sharks in elementary school, and that was a poster that's been there for a while. I just kind of have it there. And then behind my hats here, I have a Wally poster. That one's been with me since elementary school. So that's kind of like the one constant that's just always been there. That's the gist of all the posters on my wall, at least. There's definitely a lot of other science things I could talk about, but that'd be a lot to cover.
Yeah, well, I definitely wanted to make sure to, like I said, to ask about it because I mean, I think it really just also shows a bit of your personality and interest as well, and it's so fun to hear how you've sort of accumulated them throughout the years.
Yeah, it's like the massive collection. Like there's always that one character in media who's just like who has a massive collection of assorted items. That's kind of what my that's kind of what my wall looks like, at least. So I figured it'd be at least, yeah, it would be kind of nice to touch on those so that there's at least some context to the stuff back here.
Yeah, well, I definitely wanted to make sure to ask about that, but but of course, as we're beginning closing out, of course, if anyone wants to continue, following your story, where are the best places for people to potentially follow you online?
I think definitely the best one for me would be like my LinkedIn. I've mentioned I've spent a lot of time and effort looking into it, so I definitely appreciate it if anyone would like to follow me. I'd be more than happy to just text an ambient conversation. And that's the main way that I just like networking with people professionally and just casually as well. My Instagram, I think it's just Zach Vaillancourt. It's actually been a while since, yeah, it's just Zach Vaillancourt. There's one post on it for now, but I'll definitely update it more. If you want to reach out to me, just let me know you're reaching out from this podcast. I'd definitely like to see who listens to this, and I guess help further spread kindness and more awareness about STEM and what I'd like to do. So I think definitely my LinkedIn and Instagram would be the best ways to reach out. So feel free to reach out. I'd love to have a conversation.
Well, I certainly hope that those tuning in definitely do so. And last but certainly not least, I did want to allow for you to go ahead and close out episode 73 of Tansson Talks with whether it be a inspirational thought, life lesson, or whatever the case may be. The floor is all yours, Zachary.
Sweet. Overall, I think the best thing I can pass on is just to, I mentioned it earlier in the podcast, but I think it's definitely best to keep on keeping on. No matter how tough it is, no matter how much you think you fail, even if you do fail, it's just, if you really care about something, just keep on pushing through it no matter what. And eventually, even if it doesn't look like it, you'll find your place wherever that will be. So just have faith in yourself, reach out to others, no matter who it is, no matter what you think they'll think of you. Just reach out, keep on keeping on, and just reach to achieve your dream.
I absolutely love that. Well, thank you so much for, like I said, for coming back on the podcast. I know you were a guest back on episode 31, and so it's nice to have you back here for number 73. And like I said, just definitely keep me in touch, and I can't wait to continue supporting all the amazing stuff you're doing.
Absolutely. It's always a pleasure, Brandon.
Thank you so much for tuning in. I greatly appreciate it. Continue tuning in to the Tansson Talk Show every week, and I'll see you next time. Take care.
Yeah. See you guys.